Please be seated. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to the 2011 Convocation of Harvard Divinity School, which opens the 196th year of the school's history and the 375th year of Harvard University's history. So it is, I'm sure, going to be a good year. As we enter into another academic time of work together and often alone in this institution and at this moment in the history of our own nation and our wider world, I think it's fitting that we should hear today from one of our distinguished scholars who has taught, thought, and written at length about matters of difference, privilege, and power that are significant and that trouble our nation and the world today, as her title today suggests. I asked our Krister Stendahl, Professor of Divinity, Elisabeth Schüssler, Fiorenza, last spring if she would deliver our convocation address today, and she agreed to do so. And with time, she decided not only to do so alone, but to do so not simply as a single voice, but in colloquy with two of her colleagues, Professors Davíd Carrasco and Jacob Olupona. They are joining her on the podium in a moment in a conversation about diversity. Thus, without further ado, I'm going to turn the program and the lectern over to the Neil L. Rudenstine Professor of the Study of Latin America, Davíd Carrasco, who will introduce both Elisabeth Fiorenza and Jacob Olupona in turn for their remarks. Davíd?
Traditionally, our Harvard Divinity School Convocation, the addresses are given by an individual faculty member who speaks on a topic of relevance. This year, when Elisabeth Schüssler Fiorenza was invited to speak on the topic of diversity and its significance for the intellectual life of the Harvard Divinity School, she felt that it would be a contradiction in terms to speak about diversity in a monologue. She reached out to Professor Jacob Olupona and me, asking us to join her in this presentation. Thinking from our different intellectual perspectives and our life experiences, we decided on the title, Diversity Troubles, Difference, Privilege, and Power. We chose the word troubles, first as a noun, to signal the troubles, the unrest, the fear, and even the hatred that cultural, religious, and gender differences can sometimes bring. We also think of trouble as a verb, as a word of agency, as in all this diversity troubles the waters. For we live in a world where Andres Breivik, identifying himself as a cultural Christian, blows up and hunts down 77 people in Norway because, he says, Muslims and multiculturalists pose a grave danger to the purity of Western culture. And we live in a country where, just as we are putting up a statue to Martin Luther King Jr. on the Mall in Washington, D.C., it is reported that black people are far less likely than white people to be awarded grants in the biomedical research by the National Institute of Health. We live in an economic system where during the economic downturn, according to the Pew Research Center, the median wealth of Hispanic households declined by 66%, while white households experienced a decline of only 16%. All this and more points to our need to heed the meaning of the words in our subtitle as well, difference, privilege, and power. Words added to the title by our main speaker. Please welcome our inspiration for this special dialogue, or trialogue, on diversity troubles, our Krister Stendahl Professor of Divinity, Elisabeth Schüssler, Fiorenza.
The term diversity invites celebration. Bishop Desmond Tutu speaks about our glorious diversity and elaborates why we should celebrate difference. I quote him, "We inhabit a universe that is characterized by diversity. There is not just one planet or one star. There are galaxies of all different sorts, a plethora of animal species, different kinds of plants, and different races and ethnic groups. We are constantly being made aware of the glorious diversity that is written into the structure of the universe we inhabit, and we are helped to see that if it were otherwise, things would go awry. How could you have a soccer team if all were goalkeepers? How could you have an orchestra if all were French horns? We belong in a world whose very structure, whose essence is diversity, almost bewildering in extent." End of quote. Yet while celebrating diversity, the diversity of creation, Tutu is also well aware that the hierarchical social structural differences of class, race, gender, sexual orientation, nationality, age, and many other more engender a type of diversity that provokes anxiety, strife, prejudice, and even murder and war. Often the rhetoric of diversity and difference does not mention but obscures these structures of domination that cause so much suffering and injustice. For instance, when at HDS the Standing Committee on Diversity was established, it replaced the Committee on Race, since diversity includes race. However, this change of name also derailed us to explore racism as a structural component of HDS. The proverbial elephant in the room, racism, sexism, heterosexism, ageism, ableism, classism, or colonialism, to mention a few characteristics, is no longer visible. People who use these terms tend to be seen as unscholarly, unsophisticated, malcontent, or ideological. Human beings differ from each other in innumerable ways, but we are also divided by these social structural differences of domination. Such structures of domination privilege some people, cultures, races, and religions, while they negatively label and discriminate against most others. They are so powerful because they have engendered experiences and histories of discrimination and still do so today. We are all born and socialized into them and have internalized them through education, culture, and religion. Diversity invites not only celebration, but also critical reflection, lest the powers of our privileges at HTS blind us to the troubles we are part of. A rich array of diversity studies, as well as research on privilege and power, has been developed in the past 40 years or so, but they have not yet found their way into the center of the HDS research profile and curriculum. Women, gender, feminist studies, African, African American, Latin and Mesoamerican, queer or post-colonial studies in religion are found at the borders and margins of the curriculum and are not central to the research and educational ethos of the academy. They are seen as important for women, blacks, gays, disabled, or foreign students, but not for white, straight American men. They are discussed as perspectival opinions, but not as serious scholarship, which is still defined as universal, that is, as Euro-American. To give an example, Introduction to the New Testament is the scientific heart of my field of study. To change its Eurocentric frame, I have taught it assigning not only Euro-American, but also African-American, feminist, queer, postcolonial, Latina, or Asian essays and commentaries. Also, I emphasize throughout the semester the perspectival character of all interpretation because of their internalized objectivist understanding of true scholarship. Some students still say in their course evaluations that too much time was spent on perspectives and not enough on objective scientific commentary. I don't need to worry about such evaluations, but junior junior colleagues are at risk if they try to teach a multiplicity of approaches and perspectives, rather than the dominant scientific one, which is Euro-American and shaped by a 19th century understanding of science. White male class privilege still determines our pedagogy and discourses. In the 19th and beginning 20th century, the scientific ethos of value-free scholarship that was presumed to be untainted by social relations and political studies interest has been institutionalized in academic studies, such as biblical studies or the study of religion. Among many others, Nancy Lee Steppen and Sander Gilman have pointed out that the professional institutionalization of scholarship as value-neutral, apolitical, universal, empirical, and methodologically objective science as an unbiased arena of knowledge was not a natural outcome of unbiased study, but, I quote, a social outcome of a process whereby science was historically and materially constituted to have certain meanings, functions, and interests. In a complex series of innovations, science's epistemological claims were given definition and institutional representation in the form of new scientific societies and organizations, like CSBL, sharply delimited from other institutions. These innovations were tied not only to industrialization, but to the politics of class and the closing ranks of bourgeois society. Race and gender were also crucial in the construction of modern science, in that science was defined as masculine in its abstraction, detachment, and objectivity. This professionalization of the academic disciplines and gender theoretical dichotomies, such as pure and impure, theoretical or applied science, dualistic opposites, such as rational and irrational, objective and subjective, hard and soft, male and female, Europeans and colonials, secular and religious, were given material form, not only in professional disciplines, but also in their discursive practices. This ethos that characterizes the Harvard man is contrary to an academic ethos of diversity. To give another example of how this ethos is at work in our midst, the criteria for hiring new faculty or for promotion to associate or full professorship with tenure are publications, teaching, and community service. Doctoral and faculty candidates are measured by the standards of the disciplines, which have been articulated mostly by white male Euro-American scholars in the 19th century. If candidates are white, male, they are not expected to know the new variegated theories of scholars who before, in, and after the 19th century have been excluded from the Euro-American Academy. Women of all colors, African Americans, Asians, differently abled people, or scholars of other religions. Doctoral candidates around the world are still advised to pick a dissertation topic that is, for instance, not feminist or womanist, if they want to have an academic future. If they insist, they are required first to deconstruct existing feminist or womanist work as intellectually deficient, replace it with the intellectual framework of one of the great academic men in order to produce new, acceptable scholarship. Or to give another example, faculty members are judged by promotion committees on whether they have established mutual relations with colleagues in Europe, but are never asked whether they have such relations with scholars from Africa, Asia, or Latin America. Why is it so difficult to create at HTS an academic culture of diversity that studies and produces knowledge about social discrimination and their religious underpinnings? Why is it so difficult to develop a pedagogy of diversity that provides radical democratic learning spaces and encourages intellectual exchange across the dividing lines of domination? I suggest it is our status of privilege that hinders us to focus on such research and pedagogical structures analyzing prejudice and domination. Harvard is the richest university in the world, known for its rigorous scholarship and Ivy League education. However, this knowledge of belonging to a place of privilege and meritocracy also engenders insecurity. Am I worthy to be here? And competition. I have to show that I'm more worthy than others to be here. Moreover, it persuades us to align ourselves with those in power rather than with those who are marginal. Finally, it prevents us to question our institutional ethos. As good liberals, we have nothing against affirmative action as long as students and faculty candidates speak our language of privilege and not their own. It is important that new students and faculty recognize and not succumb to the dangerous ethos of privilege. We are at a pivotal point at HTS. Thanks to the hard work of Maritza Soyapa Hernandez and Loida Feliz, the diversity of our student body has increased. Moreover, we have decided to give up our Christian privileges and to create a space for multi- and trans-religious studies. We need now to go a further step in this direction and give up our scientific privilege, rooted in a decontextualized understanding of science that does not critically reflect on its social responsibilities. In its place, we need to articulate a decolonizing study of religions that is gender, race, heteronormativity, and class critical. As members of Harvard, we all have privilege and power. But the privilege and power of each of us is different because of our race, class, or gender, our histories, language, education, status, or our religion. Hence, we need to create radical democratic spaces for exploring the differences sustained by male class, colonialist, ableist, white, Eurocentric privilege. Let us use Harvard's privilege and power, not only for developing a different critical study of religions that is able to investigate the intersecting structures of domination, but also for engaging in the educational work of conscientization that is able to articulate a religious vision of diversity in terms of radical equality and not sameness.
I heard the preacher, another preacher, at Harvard say, how is it that for so long, so many could get so much so wrong? Now, the preacher who repeatedly asked that question, how is it that for so long, so many could get so much so wrong, was none other than the late beloved Peter J. Gomes, Plummer Professor of Christian Morals. You can read the line in his book, The Scandalous Gospel of Jesus, What's So Good About the Good News? More specifically, you can see his answers to the question in his sermon in the book entitled An Inclusive Gospel. In this sermon on religious and cultural diversity, Reverend Gomes surveys the errors of our ancestors and ourselves, remembering especially how Christian arrogance and ignorance, and we could add intellectual arrogance and ignorance, is painful to face but necessary to confront. He laments how from medieval Christianity, through the writings of Martin Luther, to some Christian attitudes today, how damaging xenophobia about Jews has been. He remembered how at our own HDS faculty, not that long ago, some members of the Protestant persuasion were troubled by an attempt at scholarly diversity in the form of establishing a chair in Roman Catholic theological studies. He probes the question of how is it that for so long, so many white Christians got so much so wrong about the humanity of African Americans, preferring to see them as more appropriately the help, rather than bringers of new knowledge, new methods, new dreams for our common humanity. And Reverend Gomes expresses some relief that the Bible, the same Bible that was once read to keep women out of positions of leadership, is now read in some places to call for their fuller inclusion. But Gomes notices that Christian progress in relation to homosexual brothers and sisters is still greatly stymied by fear and ignorance and even malice. Gomes preached for an inclusive gospel, and it made me wonder, can we at HDS explore possibilities in our ministries and scholarship also for an inclusive Torah, for multiple views of the Quran? And what are the limits of our diversity in views on Buddhism? Further, is it too much trouble to ask for a diverse gospel, for a diverse Torah, for a diverse Quran, for diverse santerias? If we're going to keep dialogues and trialogues going, what are the limits to our diversity? Asking these kinds of questions, and more in his own inimitable way, is our next speaker, Professor of African Religious Traditions, with a joint appointment as Professor of African and African American Studies in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Please welcome our very own Jacob K. Olupona.
Diversity troubles, 3 goals for education at HDS. Thank you, Elisabeth, for inviting me to offer my thoughts on diversity education in HDS. I will frame my contribution by discussing 3 goals I have for religious and theological studies at HDS. First, indigeneity, and by this I mean allowing for more in-depth study of indigenous religious traditions. Second, immigration, specifically understanding how immigration affects the way religion is taught in the Divinity School. Thirdly, internationalization, focusing on the ways in which theological education in HDS can become more global. These 3 goals have been my central focus since beginning my academic teaching career in America in 1990, what I often refer to as my second coming to America. They are what drive my work as a professor of religion and my social engagement in the academy and in civics life. They are also, to some extent, reflection of personal issues and concerns that relate to my life as an immigrant and a transnational subject in the religiously and culturally pluralistic mosaic that is the United States. But working towards these goals has always been, for me, a constant struggle against institutional racism, ethnicism, sexism, and more. I must add here that as a Yoruba and a Nigerian, I never experienced ethnicism in Nigeria. I lived also among Igbos. This was the first place where I came out with this. I will argue that fulfilling these three goals is key to the future of religious and theological education in HDS, and indeed in theological education in America. It is especially important that in the modern theological enterprise that we proceed within a well-rounded, internationally and domestically diverse scholarly framework. In my short time at Harvard Divinity School, the school has made some progress in recruiting minority scholars, including 2 Latina and 1 African American. We also have a strong cohort of interested scholars and students with whom to begin working towards the goals I have just described. The rich discussion in the classrooms and various other forums at HDS, such as the Center for the Study of World Religions and Women and Gender Studies, come at a critical time in higher education and the world in general. I'm very worried, however, that the American and global academy will continue to privilege Eurocentric approaches and cases while marginalizing the rich variety of religious experiences that now permeate all aspects of our shared global culture. At HDS, these conversations are being led by scholars of both minority and mainstream traditions, yet there is still more work to be done. My first goal is that we study indigenous traditions more closely, both within HDS and the academy in general. I ask for a broader understanding of indigenous faiths, in particular, as they have manifested themselves within world communities. By indigenous religious tradition, I refer not only to those autochthonous and classic examples of the Australian Aborigines, African traditional religion, or Native American belief systems, which are almost exclusively the focus of anthropological research, but also to the indigenized forms of the so-called world religions, for example, African, Asian, or Latin American Christianity and Islam. My own work deals with African religious traditions on the continent, as well as African-derived religions in the Americas. Historically, African religious studies developed from discourse on ethnicity, race, and colonialism, elaborated by armchair scholars and European colonialists. Although post-independent scholarship produced by African natives and nationalists has gained a stronger presence, I have noticed that on several occasions, when I have been asked to contribute articles on African religions to encyclopedias on world religions, the template provided for writing these articles failed to accommodate African religions and other indigenous traditions. How can we train students to think outside the box when the box is embedded in academic literature and absolutely determines the rewards and punishments of younger colleagues who live and think outside the box. When students are faced with such limited religious frameworks, they cannot recognize other ways of being religious. We must redefine the Western canon through the use of other theories and methods that welcome emerging literatures and narratives of the lived experiences of people in other cultures and traditions. My second goal for diversity scholarship reflects my interest in immigrant religious communities, a growing area of research which formed the core of my seminar, Religion, Immigration, and Diaspora Studies. The metaphor of journey, the movement of people, ideas, and culture is germane to the immigrant religious experience and very central to what we do in theology and religious studies. The stories of these immigrants and refugees were often exiles, asylum seekers, or victims of rape who have now made their way to the United States or Europe, unlike thousands of others who perished along the path of freedom. They provide an important testament to the struggle and sufferings of millions of people across the world facing annihilation, anomie, and death. These narratives of survival in Darfur, Croatia, and the Sudan are paradigmatic accents on events that resonate in a variety of religious traditions and that have served as ethnographic interpretations of existential questions about life and spirituality. By engaging in these narratives, we become socially engaged in the lives of millions of underprivileged and marginalized people across the globe. And we also, in our way, try to understand or to become transformed, stressed, and challenged. For the most part, however, immigration is treated as a political, economic, cultural, and geographical issue. And although the literature on religion and migration has skyrocketed in the last 5 years, this literature comes more often from the fields of sociology, anthropology, law, and history than from religious and theological studies, partly because immigration is often discussed in relationship to globalization, citizenship, identity formation, and population. However, even in the United States, immigration raises moral and ethical questions that are best studied by scholars of religion or theology. If we do not make these questions core elements of our curricula, we will deprive others of the wisdom of our discipline. My third and final goal is the internationalization of theological education and religious studies at HDS. The history of religion has long been a global discipline whose international quality predates that of other disciplines. For example, theological education is an extension of mission studies, which was concerned with the faith traditions of others, especially as regards evangelization and conversion of souls to the Christian faith. As a result, world religions and comparative theology have been promoted as integral parts of the discipline of theological education. Similarly, different forms of theological enterprise that developed outside the Western context have filtered into theological education. The popularity of global liberation theology in the 1970s and 80s in American universities is a case in point. Let us not forget that several powerful ecclesiastical institutions made strenuous efforts to discredit or dominate liberation theologies. Therefore, what I'm calling for is an aggressive, courageous, and holistic agenda that insists on the internationalization of all theological education at HDS and in the Americas. This reform involves, first, creating a curriculum dedicated to the study of religious phenomena regionally and around the globe. Second, we should provide MDiv and MTS students with more opportunities to conduct their field education and theological ministry studies abroad, in particular, if their scholarly and ministerial interests involve communities located outside the United States. Another bold step would be for us to establish partnerships and exchange programs with the many reputable theological schools overseas. Third, HDS should make great efforts to foster international perspectives in our classrooms. One way to do this is to diversify our student body by including more international students. We should strive for what the Dean of Harvard Graduate School, Alan Brent, in quoting a colleague called the global classrooms. To achieve this at HDS, we must continue to provide foreign scholars and students with necessary fellowships to participate in Harvard's global classrooms. We should also reconsider the recent revision of our admission policies for MTS, requiring that all incoming students take the GRE. The official reason for the change in policy is that it brings HDS admissions policy into conformity with other professional schools. Yet, Harvard Law School admitted over 200 LLM students this year without requiring the GRE. 186 of the admitted students accepted come to Harvard. I must admit that this new policy undermines a vision of theological education that is inclusive of a plurality of people and voices. This policy automatically excludes a sizable section of the global community who cannot compete in this exam with native English speakers. Finally, we must internationalize our curriculum in a way that expands our notion of diversity beyond the normative issues of race, gender, and sexuality, which, while significant, are often discussed from Western perspectives. Let us revise our curriculum to include other forms of scholarships and intellectual tradition so that it reflects our commitment to fostering an understanding of the religions and cultures of all the students in our new global classrooms. Talking about this very global approach allows us to engage in robust conversations that cross the boundaries of knowledges and cover other ways of knowing, especially those outside the Western epistemological paradigm that is so dominant in theological education. And these issues are not of concern just at Harvard alone. HDS is one of the most privileged theological institutions in America, and therefore it has a much greater responsibility to meet the challenges that Elisabeth, David, and I are discussing today. If not here, where? If not us, who? We at HDS must champion the quest for internationalizing theological education throughout contemporary America. As a Yoruba proverb says, "Kita la mubuwa," the well of the hospitable is never dry. Or if you like, you may say, the tap of the hospitable will never dry. Lady Irene cannot shut it up. To conclude, on a personal note, one of the unforgettable academic experiences of my life in America was the opportunity I had to serve as a member and later as chair of the Committee on Internationalization at the American Academy of Religion in the late 90s. I realized during those 8 years of work how much theological and religious studies has to contribute to creating global citizenship in America and indeed around the world. Let me conclude with two quotations from the Yoruba Wisdom Orature. Abani dòótọ́, ojo ni kò kí ń jẹ́ ká dá. Progress emanates from ideas and propositions which we often lack the courage to profile. Kárìnkápọ̀, yíyẹni yẹni. A group working together works gracefully, whereas a person working alone does not. Thank you very much.
Professor Olupona inspires us in our scholarly efforts to walk together gracefully. And this we must do, for I'm also reminded in listening to him about other walkers in the Sonoran Desert. We know we have diversity troubles when just yesterday, following a vigorous summer-long campaign by Fox News and the recent presidential candidate John McCain, blaming undocumented Mexican immigrants for the Monument wildfires in Arizona, it was reported by the Justice Department that the fires were set by two white men, cousins, who are US citizens. No apology has been forthcoming. This hate speech campaign by the superprivileged recalls for me as a Mexican American the poem by the performance artist Guillermo Gomez Peña about how Latino experiences may speak to others in the Americas and even at Harvard. The poem is entitled Alienation, and it goes, alienation, alien nation, alien native, alien hatred, alien out there, algin out there, Aliens the movie, Aliens the album, Cowboys and Aliens, Bikers versus Aliens, The Wetback from Mars, The Mexican Transformer and His Radioactive Torta, The Conquest of Tenochtitlan by Steven Spielberg, The Conquest of Aztlan by Monty Python, I Am, Therefore I Cross, Crossover Dreams. My fellow students of Diversity Troubles, we all have to keep crossing over as you are now crossing over into Harvard's ethos, Harvard's tradition, Harvard's errors, and great potential. Mark Twain once said, "Many a small thing has been made large by the right kind of advertising." Let me tell you that sometimes great places are made small by failures of nerve, lazy scholarship, and loss of vision. I want you to remember as you enter, you students, as you enter into and enrich this community of learners, I want you to remember that you were already somebody before you came to Harvard. Before Harvard got your interest and before it admitted you, you were already somebody with family, with ancestors, with achievements, and with questions. We invite you to help us keep and make this school a place of large mind and profound heart. And in the word used by Elisabeth Schüssler, Fiorenza, conscientización. I invoke my friend and teacher, the African-American Vincent Harding. In a recent dialogue with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Sister Helen Prigine at the University of Arkansas, it's appropriate that I call on Vincent Harding in my remarks on the same day that Preston Williams' portrait goes up here in the school. I like the portrait. I like it because you can see Preston standing up, as he always stood up. Preston Williams. Standing up, he's standing up. can't stop the man from standing up. He stands up. Vincent Harding was asked, when you were helping Dr. King write his speech coming out against the Vietnam War, and when you were surrounded by the negativity and the danger and the mobs aimed at injuring you, how did you keep from being overcome by hatred and anger? How did you keep your commitment to nonviolence and racial diversity? And Vincent answered something like this, my dear students, please understand that in all those experiences and situations, I was never alone. I was in a community of many different kinds of people who became dedicated to keeping our eyes on the prize. The prize was a new society for a new humanity, and we did not let ourselves be pushed off by the hatred and fear that had built the old society. We felt that our community included our ancestors and spirits, says Vincent, and a diversity of magical forces that we did not even know existed until we came together as brothers and sisters. We were dedicated to making a new humanity where, like this audience today, there would be black people and white people and brown people and people of many different religious, cultural, class, and gender orientations. Not as many as there should be, he said, but some of all of those, where they could be together in learning and in solidarity. Speaking for myself, I ask, is it too much trouble to ask if our school, with its productive scholarship and creative ministries, with its many achievements in new knowledge, under the indefatigable and creative leadership of Dean Graham, will our school take this stage that we have arrived at and use it not as a place to rest and boast, but as a safe space for new, significant, powerful dialogues on the crucial issues that Elisabeth and Jacob have challenged us today. In closing, 2 weeks ago today, I was at the ancient city of Teotihuacan, the city of the gods in Mexico. Sergio Gomez took me 40 feet down an archaeological shaft where Mexican archaeologists had broken into a 2,000-year-old human-made ritual tunnel whose floor was covered with cinnabar and pyrite. Though they had excavated only the first 19 meters of the 150-meter corridor, ground-penetrating radar revealed that the passage led into the very heart of the feathered serpent pyramid, where a large burial chamber will be broken into 6 months from now. Their progress, only 19 meters in, is slowed by a series of ritual and defensive walls built by the ancient Mexicans, blocking others' ways and our way down the tunnel to the treasures left within. Crouched down there in the underworld, observing the work going forward back in time, it occurred to me that here, in this other great learning place called the Harvard Divinity School, we're still only 19 meters down a long, long passageway. We still have limited knowledge of our humankind's most profound orientations to the gods and the spirits. We have limited understandings of the symbolic meanings of human languages. We have partial and often mediocre ways of critiquing the privileges and the abuses of power. We have so much to learn about the histories of peoples we care about and their human diversities. Elisabeth says that we are at a pivotal point in the life of this school, and we need to use, quote, Harvard's privilege and power to develop a different critical study of religions that investigates the intersecting structures of domination, end quote. And Jacob insists that we at the Harvard Divinity School must, quote, champion the quest for internationalizing theological education throughout contemporary America. And so in hopes of a revitalized school and a community, we three welcome you students and express gratitude that you have come to work with us on these hard issues of human difference and privilege and power. And I'm reminded of the poem by the Caribbean poet who at a moment of collision with a new continent found surprise and awe and sang out a call to a new commitment. The poem is called Oceans, and it goes, I have a feeling that my boat has struck down there in the depths against a great thing, and nothing happens. Nothing. Silence, waves, or perhaps everything has happened. And we are standing now together in the new life. So thank you, Elisabeth Schüssler, Fiorenza, and thank you, Jacob Olupona, and thank you, students, for joining us here at HDS. And remember to keep your eyes on the prize. Thank you.
Well, we come to the close of our convocation opening this year of work, and I can't think of any set of words that could embody better the challenge and the invitation that I think lies before all of us as we start our work in any academic context here, whether in the seminar room or the classroom. It is a place where we are trying to build not only a faculty but a student body, trying to build a community that comes to the table of learning here and is ready to put not simply scientific data on the table, but also oneself to some degree on the table. And that is a necessity if we come together as a diverse community of religious people, of secular people, of ethnicities of all types, of gender diversity, of all kinds of difference. If we come together like that and are willing to put some of ourselves on the table while we are challenging others, then we're going to be in a place where we might actually learn something. And that is exactly, I think, the challenge that we are striving to have at every table here at the Divinity School, in every classroom, in every discussion. And I hope you feel challenged and welcomed by the powerful remarks today to participate in that, to be a part of it, to make it better. I welcome you all to a new year at Harvard Divinity School, and I now close this convocation with simply the hope that it may be that this year may be a rich and productive experience for all of us, both individually and collectively. And now, with this, we are adjourned, and I hope that you'll all join us in adjourning to the Rockefeller Refectory, where I think there is food and drink to cheer the body at the same time that being together, I hope, will cheer the soul. So welcome to a new year.